This podcast has bad words.
Hello, simpletons.
What's up, y'all?
Today is it's a weird day.
Yeah.
We've had a lot going on this past week. The last week has felt like an eternity. And so, by the way, this is a Minimalist podcast. We discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. And in these times, especially, today we're going to talk about pandemic preparation. I'm Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus. And together we are the Minimalists, and we got our MVP here with us.
Yes, indeed. And so TK Coleman is here, our returning champion. He's been on this podcast, I think, more than anyone else at this point.
Yeah, man.
And so TK was in town because we were working on a film project with Netflix. And we had about 30 people coming into town in total from crew and other people we were interviewing. And because of what's going on with the coronavirus, we had to postpone the entire thing. And this is the second thing we actually postponed this week. Yeah. We had to postpone our West Coast tour, which TK was going to join us on in Sacramento. We're going to postpone that. We're looking at some dates in September or November, but that's simply an inconvenience. So we're going to talk about the coronavirus today a little bit, but I wanted to talk more broadly about preparation.
Yeah.
Not in the sense of prepping, like preppers, but preparing. Right. And so I'm going to argue today that minimalists are actually more prepared to deal with catastrophe, more prepared to deal with pandemics than the average person. And certainly more so than a lot of so-called preppers. And so these are some somber times, but I do want to handle a lot of it with jokes. And so we're going to be as upbeat as possible today. This is the first time I've been in a room with more than Bex and nearly a week at this point.
No, you must be going crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I have been self-quarantining, but I've been self-quarantining for 38 years, and as an extreme introvert. And now here we are today. We've got some questions.
For Josh, people are a germ.
Right, exactly.
So love people, but from a distance. So TK, I think we should probably dive into some of these questions, but before we do that, I just wanted to, we have this essay on our website. I'll try to read a little bit of it because I thought it'd be a good jump off point for us to talk about the coronavirus today. But then later this week, we're going to do an episode just about the coronavirus. And usually we call that a maximal episode. We usually put it on Patreon only for our patrons. By the way, thank you for our patrons. I know it's just $2, but that's what supports this podcast, keeps it 100% advertisement free.
We couldn't do it without our patrons.
We quite literally couldn't do it in this space. We couldn't pay Sean and Jordan and Jess and ourselves without, because we don't believe in doing ads, and so we're not going to do advertisements. And so you all help keep this afloat. But as a public service announcement, later this week in the normal feed, we're going to put the coronavirus Patreon episode on Friday in the normal minimal podcast feed. So everyone will have access to it. The patrons will have access to it a day early, but we want to get this out as sort of a public service announcement. Before we dive into our questions, let me just read this. This is from our website. You can find this over at theminimalists.com/coronavirus. And it's an essay called Let's Talk About the Coronavirus. And this came out on March 12th, 2020. So things are changing literally by the day. We're recording this on the 14th. I think it comes out on, we're in here on a Saturday because there are fewer people here on a Saturday, and it makes sense for us to do it here. But the essay goes a little something like this. I prefer to live my life by the maxim, most emergencies aren't. Adhering to this sentiment, I avoid overreacting or panicking. Of course, every so often, there are real emergencies. Even then, it's better to prepare than to panic. We never look in the rear view and wish we would have panicked more. As of today, we are unsure whether the novel coronavirus and its resulting disease, COVID-19, is a widespread emergency or an overreaction. To be clear, it's already an emergency for some. Many people have died, many more are ill, and many healthcare providers are risking their lives to keep people alive. And there's a significant likelihood it will get worse in the coming months. While you and I don't know whether we'll be directly affected, we'll certainly be indirectly affected. The stock market is tanking. Factories are ceasing production. Stores are running out of inventory. Schools and museums are closing. And many public gatherings are being canceled or postponed. To date, South by Southwest, Coachella, the Houston Rodeo, the Tucson Festival of Books, and hundreds of other events, conferences, and rallies have shuttered under the threat of infection. Even the NBA has suspended its season. In that same consideration for safety, the Minimalists have decided to postpone our West Coast tour until this fall to protect our audience. Details will be published on our tour page as soon as they are available. We believe this is the appropriate call given the best information we have about the virus so far. While all of this can be extremely aggravating, these setbacks are mere inconveniences in the grand scheme of things. The actual problem might be far more serious than shifting around our calendars. It might mean changing how we live for the foreseeable future. As we learn more about the severity of this pandemic, I'm personally being vigilant by asking our entire team to work from home, except for today while we're in the studio. But usually we come in here 3, 4, 5 days a week. I'm usually in here 6 days a week, and I've been working from home. They've been working from home. Asking people to work from home is one of the more responsible things to do because, well, as I get to in a moment, it's not just about you and whether or not you can get sick and withstand it. You can pass on a virus that could literally kill people. And so even us coming in here today was quite the risk. We're not hugging for the first time ever, which, by the way, is the next bullet point here. Shunning handshakes and gasp even hugs. It was so hard. TK came in here today. Like, first thing I want to do is, I haven't seen TK in months.
Yeah.
I wanted to give him a big hug, right?
Yeah.
But I'm doing it not just for my own safety, but for everyone else's. Canceling non-essential travel. That's something that's important. Ella was supposed to travel here this week. We were supposed to have a spring break together. That's done. We're still trying to figure out the logistics. Bex is supposed to get on a plane tomorrow. I'm incredibly worried about that. Yeah. In fact, I was talking to some doctors yesterday, actually, which seems like a week ago now. And after talking to 5 doctors, none of them could get me a test.
Yeah, that's
they didn't
so
even
scary.
know how to get a test.
It's so scary.
And I even heard, like, the Utah Jazz, when they were first and we found out they were infected, they took 58 of the tests that Oklahoma had only 75 tests that day.
Golly.
And they took 58 of them to test people. I think, by the way, I'm a huge Utah Jazz fan. I think what they did is incredibly irresponsible.
What a dick move.
Yeah, to take 58 tests of the 75 for people who were not symptomatic, by the way. And I understand why they did it, but it underlines a problem that we have and how, I mean, there are third world countries who are handling this better than the United States of America. And this is not a political partisan statement, but it is a political statement in terms of the affairs of the city or the affairs of the country. And we have not been prepared for this. And so there are countries in West Africa that we think of as third world countries who are so far beyond what we are doing. Senegal is a great example of this. They're inventing not just tests, but new ways to test people within 10 minutes possibly on site, so you can do these drive-thrus, give them results within 10 minutes. And we can't even figure out. In fact, the FDA and the CDC, it almost seems like they conspired at this point to make the pandemic worse, and they didn't. It was bureaucratic nonsense. Now, TK is our resident free market libertarian here. And so we're going to dive into
free market advocate. I would lighten up on the libertarian.
There we go.
Yeah. It's well, I mean, this just goes to show, like, this is where, for me, something like libertarianism, it falls apart a little bit, because in this situation, it's only rich NBA players can get the tests, and there's something wrong with that. And
even then, like, I was talking to Doc Green, who is in sports medicine, and they got it because they didn't have access to the test either. They had people from the hospital who were able to get the test for them. So you're right. It is it is this moment where you have to not only have the money, but have the access,
have the connections.
Yeah, have the, and I have great. Here's the problem I have is I have really good connections, and so the average person listening to this doesn't have the connections that I have. There's no way you're going to get a test unless you get really, really, really lucky at this point.
That's a great point.
So let's talk about, and we'll get back into this hopefully, or maybe we'll save it for the Maximal. But TK, let's talk a bit about the free market here. And I mean, jokingly, I texted you the other day, ribbing you, saying your free market is failing us. And we're actually going to next week. We're going to do an episode with TK about the economy. So we'll be talking a lot more about the free market and what to do in these uncertain times of economic uncertainty. And so let's talk about the free market now and how is it helping? How is it failing us in a way?
Yeah. Well, freedom is a funny thing, man. You know, in America especially, we use very romanticized terminology to talk about things like liberty. But the reality is freedom is harder and harsher than many of the alternatives in a whole lot of ways. You know, like this is why it's so difficult to fight for, and it's so difficult to hold on to when we have it. You know, the way I see the story of human history is that you've got two conflicting paradigms: the way of creativity and the way of coercion. The way of creativity is the way of freedom. It's figuring out how to solve our problems without resorting to violence.
Yeah.
The way of coercion is the way of force. It's about solving problems through suppression, through oppression, through enslavement, and so forth. And the thing about the way of coercion is it offers us very easy answers. We can solve a lot of problems real quickly if we can just enslave you, oppress you, suppress you, whip you, beat you, and make you do what we want you to do. But that generates long-term consequences that are terrible for everyone. The way of creativity, the way of freedom, it offers us more possibilities, but also more responsibilities. And that's agonizing. So to use an everyday example, if I move away from home because I don't like playing by my parents' rules and I have my own place, well, now you can't tell me what time to go to bed. You can't give me curfew. You can't tell me how loud to play my music. I am free.
You can eat ice cream for breakfast.
For breakfast, right? I am free, right?
Yeah.
But with that freedom, now comes like 1,000,001 things that I have to manage that I didn't have before. And there are 1,000,001 ways that my life can go wrong. So whenever we have a crisis, they put a little pressure on us. They say, do we really value this thing that we call freedom? Because there are a lot of problems right now, and we can get some quick, easy answers that calm everyone down if we just resort to the lazy way, the way of coercion, the way of leaning on the power of legislative force to make everyone do the things that we want to do. But that's not always the right way, because unintended negative consequences are a reality. And economists point this out all the time. It's not an emotionally satisfying answer, but it's a reality. And so my challenge is, as we think about things like this, that we do the hard work of advocating for creative solutions, right? And moments like this are sort of an example of kind of like the complexities and the challenges that come along with freedom. Because you sent me an article, for instance, I think there was some guy that was just...
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that next week. Yeah. So I'm
okay, so I'll pause here.
Yeah, I'm enraged by this guy. Yeah. So tune in next week when we're talking about the the economy, because this to me is an example of the free market failing, the free market then succeeding, but still enraging me in ways that I do believe some authoritarian... I'm feeling... although I'm feeling... authoritarianism from the community is an example, but or is the path. But we'll get to that.
But I just do want to say this though, because being in this position of like advocating for the power of freedom and the beauty of freedom, I get presented with scenarios all the time where people are like, hey, here's a bad guy that did a bad thing.
Right.
Now what do you got to think about freedom? And I like to set the context for those discussions by just pointing out, I cannot be free to love you unless I'm free to hurt you. I cannot be free to serve you unless I'm free to exploit you, right? I cannot be free to be a blessing in your life unless I'm free to be a curse. So before we have any debates about freedom, let's start with the fundamental acknowledgement that the very nature of freedom provides us with the power to do very harmful and hurtful things.
Yeah.
Because freedom isn't just the right to do whatever we want. It's the responsibility to do a whole bunch of other things that are necessary to sustain those rights. And that is literally the hardest thing for human beings to do. Yeah. It is not easy for us to be free.
No, it's not. What you're saying is with this freedom comes a great responsibility, and it's up to us to be responsible. Now, you talked about how some people are like, oh, this one guy did this one bad thing. But here's the thing, is there's always an exception exception to the rule. There's always a point where, you've got something happen. Like freedom is great 99% of the time. And then there's this 1% of the time where, shit hits the fan, where whether it's the coronavirus or whether it's environmentally or whatever it is, yes, like we are not responsible enough as a society. But I mean, I think what we're saying here though is like there is a balance. There's a balance between 100% free market and then a little bit of regulation. I hate regulations. I think regulations they suck. But I do think that unfortunately, because of humans and our tendency to not be responsible, that's why we have police on the street, is because people, you've got to have someone enforcing some type of laws, because otherwise, yes, you have people who are eating ice cream for breakfast every single day, which, actually people can do that right now, and they've got diabetes.
Right, what you're talking about is self-regulation first, and then there are times where necessary regulations might make sense on a community, local or national level, or even worldwide level.
Right. When you are preventing harm spreading throughout the community and to other people, like that is where I think regulation has to be. And you know what? I mean, unfortunately, there's no easy answer. This isn't like a binary thing. Right. It's not no freedom or freedom. It's a balance. And if I had to pick between a binary choice, I would definitely choose freedom.
Yeah. Well, on the Maximal episode, I want to talk to you both about. I think that we can call it anarchism or libertarianism or whatever we're going to call it.
I prefer the term voluntarism.
Okay, there we go.
I like that.
We can call it whatever.
Sure.
True free market.
Sure.
I think the only time it existed and worked was pre-civilization, and we're going to talk about that because I think it actually worked really well. I think there were socialist libertarians pre-civilization, and I think Dr. Christopher Ryan wrote Civilized to Death, and I think it's the best case for both socialism and libertarianism simultaneously. Yeah. And I want to talk to you both about that. Before we get into these questions, you brought up something that I just want to put out there. So on social media, we just posted this today or last night before we're recording this, and it goes something like this. There's a picture on our Instagram account, and it says this: with all the important social distancing that's going on right now, the minimalists are going to practice some social media distancing for a while too, because we want to avoid adding to the noise during these reactive times. We'll still post new podcast episodes and necessary updates, but that's it for a while. We're also going to record a podcast episode about the pandemic, so I talked about that. And then I just ended this post with, we are going to see the best and the worst parts of our communities in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Do your best to be the best part.
Amen.
And be safe out there.
Man, we cannot reiterate that enough. Yeah. It's like anyone listening to this who is experiencing this panic and this craziness in their community, the best thing you can do is be a good citizen. Yeah. Like that is, you look out for yourself, of course, and be safe. But when you can, also look out for other people.
And sometimes the best way to do that is to there's a line in this post. I'll just go back to it real quick. It says, let's see, the statement here: respond to the pandemic. It's not here. But anyway, sometimes, it's in the essay that I wrote, back to the coronavirus essay, and it basically just said that, look, I know our individualistic society is not very good at slowing down or self-regulating, but we must. At least for a while. It's no longer just about you and me. We must consider everyone else, which seems like a paradox when we talk about social distancing. But right now, one of the best things we can do is love people from afar. Because even if you aren't worried about the virus yourself, you can transmit it to others if you're not careful. And spreading the disease will lead to greater human suffering. Yeah. And that's why even making this decision to come in here today with relatively few people, it was a serious decision. We've been self-quarantining, and I've been doing a bunch of things. We'll talk about what we're doing to sort of self-quarantine and to help out. We'll talk about that on the Maximal episode, but I just want to get into some of these questions for the sake of time, and then we'll talk much more about the coronavirus on the Maximal, which you'll have access to this week as well.
It's interesting, man. We've been self-regulating for the last, a decade.
Right.
A little bit more than that.
As minimalists.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I was telling Josh and the guys here earlier how when I was calling calling all of the people we were supposed to interview for the documentary that we had to cancel. And I literally called like 18 people yesterday, just apologizing and also saying thank you. But so many of them were like, man, I'm so glad that I have chosen a simple life. Because they have, they're not panicking. Right. They're not. A lot of them have become debt free. So they're, if they don't work for a little bit, that's okay. I mean, they still got to make money, pay their bills eventually. But having big debt payments is something that I think a lot of people are panicking over right now. I mean, 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. Yeah. So imagine like being in that situation, and now you've got the coronavirus, and you have to choose between paying your bills or risking yourself getting the coronavirus. It's we've been self-regulating for the past decade, and right. I have never been more appreciative of the lifestyle that I've chosen.
Yeah, and to your earlier point about how minimalists can be, better prepared for these kinds of scenarios, consumerism is a compromise on your liquidity, and your liquidity is your biggest. It's your biggest advantage in moments like this, right? If you're just spending your money on a bunch of immediate gratification, on a bunch of cool, glamorous, glitzy stuff, what happens when a crisis strikes and your need for water, your need for toilet paper increases? Well, you're not very liquid because you spent your money on a bunch of trinkets that aren't very useful to you at a time of crisis. So it always pays off to be mindful, even if it's not obvious, how that's going to pay off in the present moment.
You mean a Rolex isn't going to fend off the coronavirus?
It's funny you say that. Bex and I were driving down Sunset Boulevard yesterday, and I see this ad for like Ralph Lauren, and it's like a guy dressed in a nice suit, a very attractive man wearing like this flashy suit. And in this time of like, it feels like we're in a zombie apocalypse, which our first question has to do with that actually. and I see this guy up there. I realize how absurd, like that we often treat that as if it matters, the Ralph Lauren suit. But it never mattered. And these times actually illustrate that. We talked about being the best in your community, not part of the worst. Let me give you an illustration of the worst real quick. This is a tweet. Now, Sean, I'll send this to you. We'll put a link to this tweet in the show notes. But I went to Target this week, literally just to do my regular shopping, right? Yeah. And it was on Thursday. And so last Thursday for y'all listening to this, and I snapped a picture. The entire toilet paper, paper towel aisles gone, got just obliterated, right? Well, someone put this sign up at one of these stores, and it said, "Dear shoppers, due to the recent outbreak of stupidity and panic purchasing by complete idiots, the nation is currently experiencing a shortage of toilet paper and common sense. Expect supplies to be replenished once these sheep-minded morons have all starved to death in their homes, surrounded by toilet paper, but without anything to eat."
I don't know. You can make toilet paper smoothies.
Oh my God. Trevor Noah did this bit where he was like, "Why are people hoarding toilet paper?" You realize that like you're pooping in the same room that has a shower in it.
Yeah.
Like if you run out of toilet paper, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, and I guess we'll talk about this in the economy episode for next week, but it's people, honestly, a lot of it is people taking advantage is what it is.
Yeah, and we're definitely talking about that. Our first question today is from Michelle in Alabama.
I've been adopting this minimalist lifestyle for a couple months, and I'm only 17. But before that, I was really passionate about watching zombie shows and movies and all that jazz. And I was wondering, how much survivability does a minimalist have if a zombie apocalypse were to happen?
So this isn't exactly the zombie apocalypse, right?
No.
But we are talking about preparing for an unexpected sort of circumstance here. Mm-hmm. I don't think, TK, you're going to advocate for the TV show Preppers, but how are we already prepared in ways that maybe we don't understand we're prepared?
By the way, when she was asking this question, and she says, "I've been really into zombie."
No. She said, "I'm passionate
about zombie flicks."
I love that.
I love that even more.
She's passionate about it.
Yeah. So what I thought she was gonna say, because she's like, "I've been into the minimalist lifestyle for 2 months, but I'm really passionate about zombie movies. Do I have to stop watching them?" That's where I thought she was going. I was like, "No, girl, you ain't got to stop that." But then she took that turn. Was like, "So what would y'all do in a zombie apocalypse?" I just want to praise that question. It might be the best of all time.
Well, I'm lucky that I have really good friends like Ryan and Sean who have guns, and Sean has lots of guns.
Yeah,
and so I think I'll be fine just because
by proxy.
Yeah. We're gonna hop in my Toyota and
guns by proxy
of all of Sean's guns will be fine. No, but let's talk about ways we're prepared and that we don't think about that we're necessarily prepared. But how has simple living, intentionality, being more deliberate with our lives prepared us for something like this current epidemic, this current crisis, this current pandemic?
Yeah, well, so in order to live mindfully and adopt the simple lifestyle, you have to be very good at not allowing your reactions to life to be dictated by mainstream thinking, right?
Yeah.
You have to sort of unplug from groupthink and say, I'm going to live consciously. I'm not going to buy something just because everyone else is rushing to the sale. I'm not going to do the, what is it, Black Thursday, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is something. They've got something for every day now, like Winter's Wednesday.
Black Thursday is a mixtape.
Black Thursday's my mixtape that's coming out next week, right after the Netflix special.
It's coming out next Wednesday.
I was planning to save that for my Netflix appearance. Like, and also by Black Thursday. I was going to sneak it in. The new hip hop album. But yeah, you in order to live mindfully, you have to learn how to make a distinction between how you are going to live and how everyone else is living, right? So let's bring it back to the zombie apocalypse, because what I love about zombie movies is there are always two elements that you have to respond to. One is the actual crisis that's producing the zombie problem, right? There's usually some sort of virus, some sort of like poison that everyone's eating that's changing them. But the second element would be the zombies themselves, the people that you know and love, that you've been living your life with, and now they're kind of like becoming a threat to you, right? And I think that's a perfect analogy for the times that we live in, because there are two crises we have to respond to. One is the actual outbreak and what we're going to do about that. But the second thing is the reactions that other people are having. What are we going to do about that? What am I going to do about the fact that I don't feel the need to buy all the water in the grocery store, right? But I know that all of these other guys over here are going to buy it all up. And now there's a temptation to let those people force my hand. There's a temptation for me to become something that I'm not out of a reaction to other people's panic. Even if I'm not panicked, I have to kind of live like I'm panicked because other people are. And so one of the things that these zombie movies illustrate is that our battle is twofold. We can't effectively deal with the crisis unless we manage our reaction to other people. And that means you have to sort of extricate yourself from being too heavily influenced by other people. And one way that you can do that is you can sort of control your level of intake, your information intake. Don't be a victim of the 24-hour news cycle. One of the problems of today is that we mistake medium for message. All of these new mediums have put a lot of pressure on these news networks to constantly have something to say, even if there's nothing to say. If you got a Twitter channel and it's been 2 hours since you tweeted, you better put something out there because our competitors are doing it. Right? If you've got an Instagram page, you better post every day because we're going to lose to our competitors. And so we can become seduced into thinking that there's always something to listen to about the coronavirus.
There's something to panic about.
Something to panic about. And that's when you get caught up in that zombie groupthink mindset. And you have to unplug from that and say, you know what? No. I'm not going to watch this all day. I'm going to stay informed, but I'm also going to stay constructive. And I'm going to give myself a few creative things to think about. I'm going to give myself a few family-oriented things to think about. I'm going to deliberately ignore my phone for an hour. I'm going to turn off my TV for the next 3 hours. Anything I can't deal with for the next 3 hours, my problems are bigger than the coronavirus, right? Yeah. And that's the same kind of mindfulness that allows you to live minimalistically in everyday life. Is that making sense?
No, it makes perfect sense, man. I'm glad you're bringing this up because that is what I heard you say was this self-regulation, this mindfulness. It helps us basically choose how we want to react to these impulses. Because I'll tell you, Mariah and I went to Trader Joe's just to get some normal fruit and things that we were going to get, and the shelves were empty. Yeah. And there is this sense of panic that started to take me over. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, it was very much like, oh my God, like I really had to talk myself down. But because of the last 10 years of self-regulating, I was able to be like, Ryan, look, man, like you can still get groceries when they restock. Like the supply chain isn't totally interrupted, but I had to like go through this exercise of not just wanting to go get a shopping cart and just buy everything that I could at that time. And
that's the opposite of being intentional, right? What you're talking about, I love the zombie apocalypse question, because what TK is really saying here is it's turning us into zombies.
Yeah.
Our reaction, the people, I mean, the post I just shared on Twitter was like the sheeple, right? We become, whatever whatever metaphor you want to use, zombies, sheeple, idiots, whatever it is when we fall into that group think, the mob mentality, the mob rule, and in fact, it's one of the reasons that populism is dangerous, right? Because populism on one side can produce something really amazing, like democracy and everyone gets a vote. Yeah. Populism can also produce mob mentality, mob rule, and if you aren't coalescing with this tribe, then you are the enemy.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's also like if one gazelle starts running, all the gazelles, they all start running. They all start fleeing. It is.
And that's what we're doing now. We're all panicking and running.
Yeah.
And we're not reacting to our informed knowledge about the actual situation. We're reacting to other people's reactions. Mm-hmm. So there's a Twilight Zone episode called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street that kind of depicts this scenario where this alien spaceship descends on the Earth and the guy on the radio announces, oh my gosh, like these aliens are here. And there's this one guy that has like this emergency shelter and he goes to hide out in there and all of his neighbors try to get in. And over the course of the 30-minute episode, you just see these people become so ugly to each other because in a time of crisis, we panic and who we truly are begins to emerge, right? And the moral of the story in the end is that the greatest enemy, it's not some monster that descends from the sky. It's how ugly we can become when we react to tragedy in a way that isn't mindful and that loses sight of the value of human beings.
So true, man. What blew my mind at Trader Joe's is how, because Mariah and I live in Hollywood, and this is like the most convenient store like in downtown Hollywood. All of the influencers that are like live streaming and like it's like they're taking advantage. It's like the media is taking advantage of it right now. Like
Ryan's saying influencers in quotes, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
I heard the vocal quote.
Yeah,
there.
We need a whole
thank you very
episode on
much.
that.
Yeah, but it's just crazy how I mean, again, it just shows people's true colors because I could tell the people recording themselves and live streaming. It was, I don't know, probably half a dozen people. It's like they weren't doing it to add value to the community. They were like, oh, here's a situation that I can take advantage of and I can aggregate more eyeballs and I can get more money for ad revenue. And that's exactly what the media is doing right now.
And I saw this same thing happen when Chernobyl was the show. The show came out and people started visiting Chernobyl. And you see like these Instagram models and like bikinis, but like hazmat masks in Chernobyl. And they're just taking advantage of this. And by the way, they're putting themselves in danger, and I think that's the important thing to think about. And I want to talk, when we talk the coronavirus episode, I do want to talk specific things that we can do to protect ourselves. And one of those things has to do, I'm just going to read my list that's part of this essay, but then I've got a whole other essay from someone else who's much smarter than me that I want to go through with you all. But I already talked about working from home if possible. If you can do that, work from home, and if you employ people like Ryan and I do, encourage your staff to work from home as well. Don't force them, but encourage them to work from home. Canceling all non-essential travel, especially on airplanes. I was talking to Dr. Tommy Wood about this, and he was saying that you're actually if you get on an airplane, you are more in danger than if you were to spend if Sean had the coronavirus but he had a mask on, we'd be safer here than if you get on an airplane because you just don't know. And the percentage of people, we're talking upwards of, it could be as high as 70%. The estimates usually are 30 to 50% of people who are going to contract this over the next 12 to 18 months. Anyway, getting rid of handshakes and hugs right now, those have to be, it's not polite. You're not doing anyone a favor if you're hugging them, if you're shaking their hand. You are doing them and you a disservice, and you're especially doing your grandparents and older folks, people who are over 80. The mortality rate on this thing is 22%. We're talking a death sentence for 1 out of 5 elderly people. And you can give that to someone. I see. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Did you see? Get him out of here.
This podcast is over.
Quick shot, shoot him.
Before he turns into a zombie.
All right.
Wait, can I say one thing on that?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting just to play on words for a little bit, how similar the words sanitize and sanity are. So with all the emphasis that
he's gonna preach at us.
I'm gonna start like waving my hands and swaying back and forth.
Don't just sanitize, realize.
Amen.
That's the only thing you need to know to be a black preacher, is just make sure you rhyme at the end of the sentence. So when we use that word sanitize,
that's my backup career.
Right.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was also saving that for the Netflix documentary, but I've got to find some new tricks. But so we speak a lot about things like keeping our hands clean, but I also think it's important to keep our heads clean, right? To keep toxicity out of our lives, because just because you acknowledge danger doesn't mean that you need to live in fear. And I think the only way that you can really ground yourself in a mindset that's going to be helpful to people is to play by a rule that says for every 5 minutes I'm listening to the news, I'm feeding myself 10 minutes of something that's going to actually nourish my soul. Whether that's me meditating, whether that's me watching some healthy programming, whether that's reading a novel that's inspiring me. Because of one thing you can be sure, no matter what hard times we go through, you are not going to be helpful to anybody if you are trying to help them from a state of lack, if you are trying to help them from a state of panic. It's like when we're on the airplane, what do they tell us? You know, like you got to stay calm. Or like when you're calling 911, all of your emotions make you want to be like, oh, but you can't help anybody like that, right? You got to stay calm, even though tragedy's around you, and say, I live at 555 5th Street. This is what's going on. And that's counterintuitive, but that's how you actually help people during a time of emergency. So do your best to be realistic and informed, but also do your best to stay mentally healthy and stay positively focused. So if you are ever called on to come through for somebody in an emergency, you can do that from a state of poise and confidence.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a balance between like overreacting and living in fear. And then, some people still think that it's not real. Yeah, and it's like, I mean, there's a medium balance there, and I think that's what you're talking about. Is that balance is going to save your life potentially.
Here are a couple other things from the essay, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes so you can read the entire thing. You definitely should read it, and just because it talks about coronavirus preparation, but we're going to talk a lot more on the Maximal, which you all will have access to as well. And then we got a couple more questions we'll try to get to, although we're running out of time here. Avoiding public spaces and crowds of people. So those two things specifically. Anywhere where crowds of people are gathering. And when I say crowds of people, I'm talking even this is borderline crowd of people. I had to check with everyone here whether or not they had symptoms, and even then, you still could have the virus and be asymptomatic right now. So reducing grocery shopping to once a week. I strongly recommend going as soon as the grocery store opens. By the way, that tends to be the time where fewest people are there. Some of the grocery store I tend to go to opens at 7 a.m. And so that's the time. Tomorrow, Bex and I are going to go 7 a.m.
I bet you
right as they open.
I bet you there's still a line.
There might be, and if there is, I'm going to leave. And so because I have enough, I have enough. If there's a line, if there's a crowd of people, you just leave. And it's okay to do that. We're not talking about forever. We're talking about changing our lives for a temporary period of time. Right now, this is a pandemic. Eventually, it will become endemic, like the flu. And we're looking at the death rates. They're somewhere 6 to 10 times of what the flu is, but it's not that we don't have a mortality rate of, say, the avian flu. If we had that, it'd be totally different. The avian flu has a 60% mortality rate. That is true end of world sort of zombie movie pandemic. We'll talk more about that on the Maximal. A couple more questions here. In fact, let's skip Grace's question in Missouri. Oh, before we do that, Michelle, I do want to send you something. We have a free ebook on our resources page. I think it's going to help you out a lot. You're asking about this. How do I live more intentionally? Well, this ebook is called The Minimalist Rulebook. It's 16 rules for living with less. And in there, we talk about just-in-case items versus just-for-when items. We talk about things like the 30-day minimalism game, obviously, which is less applicable right now. But we have the wait for it rule, which I think is really, really important right now. Pausing and just being able to wait for a day or a month in some cases. You don't need most of the things you think you need. You probably don't need 4 cases of toilet paper. You don't need any toilet paper in an emergency. Right. I've never needed emergency toilet paper.
I don't know. What about that one time?
You mean when we were on tour?
No, when you were with Bex and you were like going through your stomach stuff.
Oh, I mean, I'm still going through the stomach stuff. I totally pooped my pants on Christmas Day. I've pooped my pants once in my life.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
That actually might be, when we talk about Christmas music, that might actually be the first Christmas song that would horrify me.
I
pooped my pants on Christmas Day.
Here's the thing. I didn't have emergency toilet paper
running down my leg.
And somehow I lived through it. All right. Lightning round. This is where we answer your text messages. You can text us 937-202-4654. Those text messages go both to Ryan's phone and my phone. We have more more time since we're quarantining ourselves in our houses.
Yeah.
So you can text us. We will try to respond to as many people as possible. We'll answer some of our favorites on the podcast as well. This one is from S. Schmidt. I'd love to hear your thoughts on preparing to quarantine for 2 to 6 weeks while living a more minimalist life. Well, I'm going to echo something that TK said. By the way, the lightning round is where we answer questions with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We put the text to these minimal maxims in the show notes, so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you like. And now you can find all of our minimal maxims in one place over at minimalmaxims.com. TK's already said several pithy things I've seen Sean writing down, so we'll have those in the show notes for you as well over at theminimalists.com.
I want to be able to talk as fast as Josh does.
I'd love to hear
store for details.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on preparing for a quarantine. So here's the thing. I would just say don't let others' expectations dictate your standards. Yeah. And right now the expectations are, I have to hoard. I have to have this. I have to grab this before someone else does. Why? Did you have to do that a week ago? 2 weeks ago? Do you think that the entire system is going to fail that much? And if so, if you do believe that, then you need to look at precedent, because Wuhan didn't run out of running water. Wuhan still had electricity. And if the epicenter of the pandemic still had running water and electricity, do you think you need to hoard water? And do you think you have to have a generator for it? We are overreacting in times based on other people's expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, I don't know if I had something pithy, because I didn't have time to prepare for this. Now I know how our guests feel when we spring it on them. But no, I would just say be clear on what is just in case and what is just for when. Like, personally, Mariah and I, in general, always have about 2 weeks worth of meat in the freezer, because we order from uswellnessmeats.com, and totally not an advertisement, but they have like great grass-fed, grass-finished beef. It's actually cheaper than like going to Whole Foods in Los Angeles. And we order 15, 20 pounds at a time, because that's what we have to do to get a bulk order that comes out deep frozen. It's really, it's great. So we have in our freezer, we certainly have, a week or two worth of toilet paper, and, anything that we have, soap, we usually, I order that because you can get, when you buy 5, you can get a little bit of a discount, and I know we're going to go through it. So all these items that I'm talking about, these are all things that are just for when. It's not just in case.
You know you're going to use them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there is a balance between buying toilet paper one sheet at a time, and then going to Walmart and buying every single roll of toilet paper that they have.
Right.
So when you live mindfully, it helps you to determine the just for case items versus the just for when items.
I love it. I'll say coronavirus don't care about your politics. It's not a liberal thing or a conservative thing. It's a human thing. Resist the temptation to politicize everything.
Yeah.
And the second thing I would say is an ideological virus is just as dangerous as a biological virus. Avoid the ideological virus that comes from letting other people do your thinking for you. Bad information can and will kill you. You got the time. You're being forced to stay home anyway. Take the time to do your own research and think for yourself.
Yeah.
All right, we got a bunch more to talk about today. We're going to do this on the Maximal episode. If you want to support us, it's theminimalists.com/support. Here are some of the things we're going to talk about on the Maximal episode. We're going to talk about prepping. We're going to talk about how bad is this actually going to be based on the stats. We're going to look at actual stats instead of just speculating. We're going to talk about self-quarantining starting now versus later, and what are the different effects. We're going to talk about what's the end game here out of all of this. Like, is there an end game? And if so, what is it?
Stay alive. That's the end game.
Right, but in the meantime, what also do we accomplish? We're going to talk about home health care. We're going to talk about who is most affected, old people, but also how young people are affected by this and in other ways. We're going to talk about the view from China. We're going to talk about that no problem is so bad that overregulation can't make it worse. I think TK is going to like that.
That's a great point.
The efficient market hypothesis is the real victim. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about masks and respirators. Are they good or are they bad? Tune in this week to find out. And we're going to talk about zinc and how that might help out with the coronavirus, or might not. We're going to talk about how it may or may not help.
How supplements can help in general, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk about optimism in general. And then it looks like, Ryan, we've got some more questions here. We've got questions about How much stuff should we have on hand when catastrophe happens? We're going to talk about what items should I have in an emergency kit. Is it better to have health insurance for a medical emergency, or simply save money for such occurrences? And we're going to talk about how to spend our time while we are self-quarantined. If we're spending more time at home, how do we spend that time? And how do we avoid spending our time in unhealthy ways if we are self-quarantining? Because I think that is a danger as well. And if you want to hear all that, listen to this week's Maximal episode on the Minimalist Private Podcast. You can find that over at theminimalists.com/support. We're also going to, as a public service announcement, we'll put that in the main feed this Friday as well. But we really do appreciate your support if you are a Patreon supporter. It keeps this podcast 100% advertisement free. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
Before we take off, let's listen to some comments and tips from our listeners.
Hi, this is Josie from Austin, Texas. Ryan talked about replacing his T-shirts every year when they were faded and smelly from also wearing them to work out. When I have a T-shirt that's looking worn, I move it to my workout clothes and toss or donate what I've been wearing to exercise. That keeps my regular clothes in better shape and they last longer.
Hey, Josh and Ryan. Alicia from Australia. Just ringing because I was listening to your Pittsburgh podcast, and there was a woman there who was asking a question about what to do with her blanket that an aunt had given to her, and it was covered with like photos of her as like growing up and as a child, and she does not want to keep it. And I had a suggestion that she could donate it to an animal shelter. Any blankets or, old sheets or towels or bedding and stuff that people want to get rid of in their mincing journey. Animal shelters are a great option because obviously the animal's not going to care if there's a warm blanket with a picture of your face on it. They're just going to be grateful that they have something warm to snuggle up into and have a nice, safe sleep.
All right, y'all, that's it for right now. I want to thank TK Coleman for being here for this minimal episode. You can find him at tkcoleman.com. What are you on social media? TK _Coleman on Twitter, right?
Yeah, there you go, man. And then on Instagram, you can check me out at official TK Coleman, and also check out Rev1 on Instagram. Okay. Or go to fee.org/Rev1 for my website.
Yeah, so
sorry,
all right.
We'll find all
I want the people to find me.
Yeah,
man.
no, we'll link it all.
Well, real quick.
No, it's not advertising at all, man.
No, it's definitely not an ad. You didn't pay us anything.
No, if anything, I was chuckling because you've got 3 different things, and I know like if it was up to you, it wouldn't be that way. But it must be hard to keep up with all that, man.
I think the best spot, you can find him at tkcoleman.com or follow him on your social media platform of choice. We'll put links to everything in the show notes as well. He also is a director of education at FEE, which is the Foundation for Economic Education. There we go. and so we'll put a link to that as well. Real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalists. Not a whole lot. We are unfortunately canceling things. We're still trying to figure out what we're going to do with the podcast. We really appreciate your support. So go ahead and support us if you can. Check out our resources page. I mentioned that Minimalist Rulebook. It's on the resources page over theminimalists.com/resources. A bunch of free resources there. Nothing that you can pay for on that page, but free resources you can check out, including those 16 rules for living with less. For our added value this week, Ryan.
I was hoping you were going to ask TK for a Christmas song recommendation.
Not at all. Because we are in the middle of the end times, or so we feel like.
Yeah,
that should have made your list for things people can do to get through the coronavirus.
Well, so
listen to Johnny Mathis.
Mark Maron has a new special out. I mean, perfect timing. It is called End Times Fun.
Oh, nice.
And it just came out. I mean, he recorded last year, so he had no idea. But he does talk about some apocalyptic stuff. So I thought we would, instead of ending with a song this week, we're going to end with about a 1 and 20-second bit that he has from his new Netflix special. And by the way, Mark Maron, I've seen him live quite a few times at the Comedy Store.
Yeah.
This is one of those rare occasions where it's actually better filmed.
Really?
And that barely ever happens with stand-up comedy.
Totally agree. Yeah.
And since you're going to be self-quarantining anyway, go ahead and go home. If you have Netflix, check out Mark Maron's new special, End Times Fun. Let's have some fun during these trying times. So we'll check out a little snippet from that. It's one of my favorite jokes. Well, it's one of my favorite ones that we can actually air because there's some stuff there. His final joke is truly hilarious, but we couldn't put it on the podcast. So tune into that. And if y'all leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this. Love people and use things because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Stay healthy, y'all. Thanks.
The Minimalists.